News Limited, with their new interns, one of the questions they're asking is, where do they see the news being in 20 years' time?
Someone said today, where are we at with the 5-year roadmap? I mean, I don't, I don't even think about a 5-year roadmap. It's hard enough to work out what's going to happen next year. I mean, you look what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, the tablet came from nowhere. You look what's happening on the smartphone now. The explosion of the smartphone in this country and globally, and our mobile audience has grown like you wouldn't believe. It's grown 6-fold in 2 years. It now represents 1/3 of our total digital traffic. I mean, that kind of didn't come from nowhere, but it's kind of, it's hard to sort of to see where the next trend is. You almost kind of feel like you're trying to keep up in terms of devices. But look, I think probably the most interesting thing that's going on is what's happening in the lounge room and the convergence of media and smart TV and one screen, and what that means for an organisation like ours, an organisation that has broadcast assets, that has a lot of journalistic assets, great quality journalistic assets. I think that's probably the most interesting thing for us in the kind of the sort of the next horizon.
I give you a little story. When I grew up, we used to get out to a beach called, I got asked this question about a week ago, so I'm prepared for it. We used to go to this beach called Kawakawa Bay, and it was awesome when the tide was in, because you walk across the road and you get in the water and you could swim around. When the tide went out, it'd go out for a bloody 1.5 miles before you could get to the ocean. And that's very much, and it's mud flats, so it sucked. And that's very much what news is like today for me. There's an enormous shallows. There's this enormous expanse of 140 character elements of news and very short form, uninformative, regurgitated stories. And I'm hoping the future, it's more of an ocean beach. There'll be the shallows that act as really efficient distribution pathways and links to deep, rich content. I think the other shift, and like your guys, I read the conversation now every day. It's just really artfully done. That content needs to be hyperlinked out so everyone can get to it. I also think the flip is that this notion that, and the problem these guys have is the written word is becoming less and less effective in a multimedia world. And you're already starting to see the impact of the smartphone and the horrific attack on the soldier in the streets of Britain, where you've got the guy who just committed the crime being recorded on a smartphone and that relayed to the world. And that's just an absolutely atrocious thing to see. But boy, does news change when that happens, right? And you imagine the impact now when we've all got a pair and 5 to 8 years of Google Glasses on our head, and we're recording and streaming and distributing our content in real time, and others are repackaging. I think the news business, the media element of the news business, just gets completely upended.
So, okay, a couple of things. First of all, I think Alan's right. Although he says 10.5 million papers are being sold now, I think you'll probably see the Sydney Morning Herald and Age will stop printing within a year or 2 years, Monday to Friday. They'll print at weekends, as Alan was saying. I think people still want to read papers at weekends. I actually think that people may want to buy a paper, and again, much as Andy says, if you're in a cafe and you want that experience of actually just having a coffee and reading a paper, people sometimes will prefer that to reading their iPad, but it'll become a very expensive premium price thing. Let's not forget the newspaper. People get hung up about it. It was just 150 years ago the cheapest way to distribute information. That's all it is. Today, the cheapest way is online. The most expensive way is actually through newspapers. So it's going to become premium price. We're going to sell fewer of them. That's one point. The second point is that newspapers, particularly if you lived in Australia, so far away from the rest of the world, you could actually harvest the world's press and then reprint it locally. Now you can just read, the New York Times every morning. You don't need local aggregators anymore. So the real issue is, what's the point of local newspapers? And the point of local newspapers is not to tell you what's going on in Syria or elsewhere. It's to tell you what's going on locally. So there's going to be local, hyper-local newspapers which are going to tell you about what's in the community. That's what they're going to be. However, who's going to pay for them? Right? Who is going to pay for them? Because somebody has to pay for that local content. And I don't really know how that's going to be done. Are people going to pay money through a paywall to get local content? and because local content will become, I think, you know, a rare, I mean, the New York Times can't cover what's happening in Cronulla, for example, you know, or the changes at the airport at Sydney. So that's the kind of stuff they won't do. But what you will have is big brands like the New York Times, like The Guardian, like the Financial Times, like the Wall Street Journal. These will become global brands that everybody in Mumbai through to New York will be reading, and then they'll be supplemented by local stuff, be they magazines or print or local websites and whatever else. But frankly, the age of everybody trying to do gossip when TMZ does it better than anybody else, you know, what's the point, you know?
Yeah, but I'd argue that for the right publication that knows their audience, and if that audience wants gossip, that is the point. Now, we don't need to see the future 20 years' time to know how we need to prepare for it. 20 years ago, the skills that equipped us as journalists and publishers were knowing your audience, knowing your advertisers, deliver both of them products. That's what we've got to stay focused on, and that's what will get us through the next 20 years.
Yeah, but you had
it doesn't matter what that future
monopoly
is.
or duopoly markets here. That's all gone, you know. It's a changed landscape. It's a world market now, you know. That's the bit that's
But the
changed.
one thing capitalism teaches us is a model will emerge, and
Absolutely.
the model will come out based on those two principles.
Tim, I believe new models will emerge, new ways of funding the media, funding journalism, and journalism isn't just about the serious bit that I do, by the way. It's about everything, including specialist magazines. New models will evolve, I'm absolutely sure, and Alan's talked a little bit about that. Andy's talked a bit on it. I'm sure that will evolve. However, right now, we're at that thing where it's like, you know, an earthquake where the tectonic plates are moving and nobody quite knows how it's going to settle. They will settle.
I think what's interesting is that, you know, I started my life in PR, so we were the flacks, they were the hacks. It was sort of the socialists versus the capitalists, and to many extents, what's been interesting for me, and I see this in Lisa and in you, Tim, and you, Andrew, is that journalists are becoming entrepreneurs. The most successful young journalists I see entering the market are really entrepreneurial. They're not sitting there going, oh, I'd like to sign up for my, you know, super program with news for the rest of my life. They're going, I'm going to write this column, I'm going to write these books, I'm going to contribute here, I'm going to write here, I'm going to do... They identify with themselves as being really entrepreneurial. And I think that's the big shift. You know, journalism was once a job that you went and did with great pride in the kind of the fourth estate element of the gig, and the specialisation you could have as the car reporter for the Times or the economist reporter for the FT or whatever. And now you sort of go in going, shit, the world's my oyster, you know?
Where business meets journalism.
Yeah, it's exciting.